Hi there, and welcome to the Multiply You podcast, where we showcase top experts in their space and reveal all the secrets you need to know to multiply you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Austin Clark here, host of the Multiply You podcast, where I interview top experts in their space and in business to bring value to you each and every week. And this week's guest is no exception. Very, very excited to be able to introduce him here in just a moment. As you know, and if you've listened, this episode is brought to you by Moxie Pest Control. We are growing not just locally in Arizona, but nationally at a dizzying pace, if you will. We're excited about that. We grow all the same ways that any organization grows. But more specifically, we've been growing via acquisition. And so we've noticed in Arizona and also nationally that there are just so many pest control operators that are looking to get into the next chapter of their life. And so we've been a great opportunity or option for them to be able to move on and to be able to do that. We've had a lot of great success stories in just the last 18 months, 24 months. And so if you know anybody that has got 3 or more vehicles on the road, very respectable brand, have them reach out to me. They can call or text me directly. And my cell phone number is 480-254-9730. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Chris Mursau of Topgrading with us. He's the CEO of Topgrading. We at Moxie have been such big fans and have done the very best that we can to read, study, apply really everything that we can. And I think that as we've done some of those things right, we've had tremendous success, and I'm excited to be able to maybe sprinkle some of that in to here in this interview. Topgrading is a system and standard for improving the productivity, profitability, and progress of an organization by recruiting, hiring, and developing teams of top performers. Chris has been consulting and teaching organizations and individual managers how to pack their teams with A players since 2001. He has conducted over 2,500 in-depth top grading assessments for internal and external candidates, helped hundreds of people achieve their A potential, and trained thousands of people in the methodologies proven to improve their success, hiring top performers and high performers. His client list is broad and diverse, including some Fortune 500 companies, small to medium-sized businesses, and nonprofit organizations also. Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks, Austin. I'm doing well and happy to be here.
Wonderful. Let's kind of get right into it. I mean, how you've been with the company for 2 decades. You've been swimming, not just drinking, but swimming in the Kool-Aid for a long, long time. How did some of this concept with Dr. Brad Smart and Topgrading, and how did it come to be? Was there a problem that the group was trying to solve? Was there a big need? There obviously still is today. How did some of the early days of this, how did it come about? How did it happen?
Yeah, so interesting, Austin. I wasn't around in the early days because Topgrading started actually in the early 70s. And, you know, what it really was, it's so I hear Brad sort of stumbled upon a lot of what we talk about, you know, with in terms of the Topgrading methodology today. And, you know, the way he did it was he joined a group of organizational psychologists, and they used, you know, some typical things like testing and short interviews. And he sat in on an assessment and kind of had the question like, all right, so how on earth can we determine if this person is going to be a good fit or not? 1, we don't know them all that well. And 2, we don't even really know what the job is. And so, yeah, he called the prospective manager and got a little more information about the job and got a feel for the job. And, the candidate who he sat in on the assessment with said, hey, could we spend a little bit more time together? And that time together ended up being several hours and the first Topgrading interview. And so, you know, Brad's like, all right, so that I got to know the guy, he happened to be a guy, a lot better in that 2 or 3 hours than I did reading all the assessments and whatnot. And so he began doing that. And, you know, over the years, we've just added to it, you know, added some screening tools and added some things that help get to your finalist candidates. But that interview is essentially what it was, you know, back in the 70s.
So relatively unchanged then. I mean, it was kind of proven and you made some tweaks, but it's mostly unchanged because if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. The concepts are still there. Yeah. The wording of the questions. Yes, that has been tweaked over time. The order of the questions has been tweaked over time, but it is still chronological, in depth, and the interview is still chronological, in depth, and structured, just like it was in the beginning.
And so tell us a little bit more about some of your path. So joined the organization, started early 70s, joined the organization in early 2001. I mean, how has your path evolved into what it is today? Were you headhunted or started as the CEO, or did you start doing something different? What is some of your path at Topgrading then?
Well, kind of overall or in general, really, getting into Topgrading. It's a nice merger of what I was interested in, in my early to mid 20s, and that was psychology and business. Initially thought I might want to be a psychologist, and then realized that psychologists listen to people's problems all day, and didn't think that was the right path for me. So not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, got an MBA, and then ran across one of Brad's books and just actually approached him and said, "Hey, are you looking for anyone?" And he said, "Sure." And we've just kind of evolved from there. I started off interviewing. I started off, of course, observing first, and then interviewing frontline people. To get a whole bunch of interviews under my belt, and it's really evolved from there.
So Topgrading speaks a lot and I appreciate that it's such a wonderful workbook because it just really lays out the pre-screening, the first interview, the second interview, what questions you're asking in which order. We hear all of the time in work or in business or whatever else, A player, A player, A player. How does Topgrading define an A player?
Yeah, so the two parts of the definition are actually pretty easy to understand. An A player is a high performer who fits your organization culture really well or exhibits your core values. So they deliver the results you'd expect from a high performer, and also they deliver them in a way that makes them a good team member and team builder and such. And so those are the two big pieces. Now, lots of bullet points beneath those. And we talk about the behaviors an A player is expected to exhibit. A lot of competencies on the bottom of that list, but those are the two big things. A lot of times I'll hear, well, a person's an A player, but they offend people sometimes, or they're a little bit arrogant, or they're not a great leader. And in our definition of A player, that person is not an A player. It's a both, and both of those things are equally as important.
Well, and as I prepared for this interview, I've heard you say in different interviews, you might have someone that performs by the numbers, perhaps sometimes in sales organizations, right? Well, this person brings in $1 bajillion a year, right? But they treat people like garbage, or they don't show, or whatever it might be. And so you really have some decisions to make at that point about like who the company is, what the culture is, what are we willing to hire people by and fire people by, and those are some big decisions.
Yeah, and also, and I may have said this, and I say it often. That A players don't want to work for A players. Yeah, other A players don't want to work for or work with non-A players either. And so if you have someone who is a performer but toxic to the culture, the result is often losing other A players around. They just kind of won't put up with it because they have options.
I love that you said that, and I do want to dig in a little bit more to that. And please tell me if my thinking is off. But one of the things that we'll say internally is, look, we want as many A players as we possibly can. Period. End of story. That is it. A players tolerate B players because mostly the biggest difference between a C and a B player is that there's effort there, is that there's progress there. But A players will not tolerate C players. And so if the C players are not quickly becoming B players and progressing or moving out of the organization, then the A players are gone. Is that accurate? Do you have more commentary there, or?
Yeah, also I would agree with that. I certainly would agree with that. Now, one thing that's interesting, we don't often see C players become B players. especially those who don't fit the culture all that well. If they're a C player because, a culture fit, maybe they're a low performing and they don't fit the culture all that well. It just takes so much effort, to move the needle. We should really do one of two things and do it fairly, of course, but it's right. Move them somewhere, either outside of the organization or to a job inside the organization where they would fit better and where they could be an A player. That's really the way, the way to make a C, something other than a C, because getting a C to an A, the probability is relatively small and it's going to take a really, really long time.
One of the things, Chris, that you were saying is that, and I'd love to get more of your thoughts on this, is that C players often don't become B players. I know one of the excuses, and perhaps it is just that, an excuse that I'll make is, well, maybe they're in the wrong or on the wrong seat in the bus. And so how often do you see, or what percentage, if you could say, do you make a move like that and that turns out and that's a good thing?
Yeah, and also I don't know the percentages on that, but what you were saying is exactly correct. If someone is a C player, it's possible to move them into a different role and they become an A player maybe overnight. Now that would be more if they're a great culture fit and they really exhibit the core values, but they're in a job that is too big for them in terms of their skill and ability. If we move them into another role, like I was just talking with a client, and it was a manufacturing company, and the person started off as a vice president of operations, so had 2 or 3 plants reporting to him, and that was too much, and so they moved him down to plant manager, and that was still too much. Moved him down to head of quality, still too much. One more move to manager of the tool room. And that was a perfect fit. Now, that took a long time to move down. They had a culture of not replacing people. If you work there, you work there. Not many organizations have that much patience, nor would I necessarily recommend 4 levels down, but kind of an extreme example of finding the right spot and a person turning into an A player who was not an A player in another role.
And so it sounds like if they're a culture fit, hey, maybe try a change or two. If they're not a cultural fit, it's probably a hard no. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to the organization. It's not fair to their teammates. But perhaps if it's just a little more training, a little more oversight, and a role change or so, maybe give that another shot.
Yes. Yep. And also when we say whatever you do, be fair about it. I mean, we have to look inward, as managers. You don't ask the question, did we give that person a fair shake? Do we lay out expectations clearly? Did we give them the training and coaching they needed early on to help them get there? Or did we throw them into the proverbial deep end of the pool and say, good luck? And so we need to think about that as well. What you said though about the not being, if they don't match the core values, again, there are exceptions to this, but rule of thumb, moving someone in that category into another role, you're still going to have someone who doesn't fit your core values.
And so, Chris, you guys have thousands of clients. You guys have consulted, all over the place. What are some of the reasons or excuses that you just hear over and over of why people hang on to people that are not A players? Why are companies slow to make a change that would be beneficial, not just for the individual, but for the company and the team? What are the reasons that you hear?
Well, one of the reasons is just that we're human, and that employee has maybe a family and kids and
mortgage bills. Yeah,
of course. And so, we know there are some ramifications to that. And so we think more of the individual than the team sometimes. That absolutely happens. And it's also painful. Who wants to fire someone? No one likes to do that. And some will just, not deal with it as long as they can until something dramatic happens. And there's all, I use the analogy from the movie, or the scene from the movie Dumb and Dumber, where, it's, hey, what chance do, we have to go on a date or whatever it is? And she said, 1 in a million. So he said,
so you're telling me there's a chance.
Exactly. And that's the thing, it's like, hey, maybe a little more coaching or a little more of this or a little more of that, and the person will get there. But often it's not the case. And so, we're biased in this area because we're known for hiring really well and having some good tools and methodology to get you there. Say, hey, put the effort in up front to maybe nearly ensure you get the right person in the right seat. And then, it's much less painful because you don't have to deal with some of those issues on the backside. Also, I think there's one other reason. I think it's unsaid, but I think a lot of people have given up on hiring processes, and methodologies because, they've tried different things. Sometimes it works. A lot of times it doesn't. And so they say, hey, I've got someone here who's mediocre, but if I replace them, I could replace them with someone who is worse than mediocre. And so they hang on to those people, especially those people who are in the middle, who are disappointing, but not terrible, because they just don't believe they have a real high probability of getting someone better in there.
So there's a little bit of a fear is the second thing that I heard you say, or it's more effort, more work. And then the first thing was that we're just humans and no one gets excited about waking up early on Monday morning saying, I get to lay 5 people off. I can't wait. It's going to be a great day. And I'm excited to do that. Said no one ever. You did say something, Chris, that I'd love to, there's a lot of leads. There's a lot of managers that listen. And I would specifically for the leads in my organization, love to hear what you would have to say about what is the, you talk about making sure we've done everything that we can do. Did we explain the job correctly? Do they have the job scorecard, which I wanted to ask about here in a moment? Were they set up to succeed? How much time? This isn't a fair question because it depends, but I mean, how much time, how much effort does a manager put into someone before it's like, hey, they're not getting it and they need to either not be here or change into a different role? What does that look like?
So the time is going to depend. But when do you say, hey, kind of arrive at the conclusion that, hey, this is not going to work out? I think the answer is when progress flatlines. Or if, with some effort and some coaching and some development and training, if they need it, if you don't see any progress, at some point, is that, a month or a week or a year? It's probably not a year. That's kind of long, to not see any progress whatsoever, but it may be, a few weeks, it may be a few months, but, probably not longer than that. And it's really after that progress flatlines or when you don't see any improvement, that's the trigger to say, all right, it's time to maybe have that tough conversation.
Yeah. And I'll bet it probably depends a lot on the role. Is it a frontline type role? Is it a C-suite type role? Is it $1 million company? Is it a $100 million company? I was on a couple of weeks ago with Scarlett Nolan. She's the president of Truly Nolan, the national pest control company that everyone recognizes with the yellow cars and mouse ears and very recognizable and well branded. And she's been in that role for about 2 years. And one of the things that she said is that, I feel I've been in the role when I was in it for about a year. I finally started to feel like I was starting to do some of those things right. And maybe for someone in that kind of position, it does take a little bit longer rather than someone cranking out widgets or on the manufacturing line or whatever else.
And so, Austin, we talk about A players and B players and C players, but there's another category we talk about, and that is A potential. And, so you think about someone being hired and they're fresh and they're on their first day, they're probably not an A player when they walk in the door.
Sure.
Some things to learn and some training and they need to understand the organization and such. And so they're A potential for some period of time. And as you just said with a new CEO, it takes a year to, understand the organization and then figure out what the strategy should be and, then begin executing to see some progress. And, for us kind of on the long side, that A potential has sort of a shelf life of about a year for an executive or a leadership role. But then you're right, on the other end of the spectrum, we had a grocery store client years ago, and I used shelf life, not purposefully, but the shelf life for a potential in a cashier role was 4 weeks. So if a new cashier was not an A player within 4 weeks, very low probability they would ever get there. And so they would make that tough decision relatively quickly. So you can think about it that way. If you're not seeing progress on a frontline role, maybe within a month, that's probably about the time. And if you're not seeing progress in an executive role, as long as they're not toxic, you may give them up to a year with some help to see if they can make some progress.
I love that. So let's fast forward to today. There's some serious issues as it relates to work and workforce that our country is facing for a variety of different reasons. I'd imagine the principles of top grading are unchanging or unchanged. How have you seen throughout some of this top grading work? Have you guys pivoted at all? Are the principles? It was proven then, it's proven now, it's even more relevant in a pandemic or the aftermath of a pandemic. What is your take on some of the environment of labor shortages and employers having to pay an inflated rate for not any added value? You know what I mean? While some of this is going on.
So Austin, I'm not going to get into some of the reasons that there is a shortage of more frontline employees, because we all know that, and it's going to depend on your political your political alignment. I'll say, like, in terms of top grading, though, does it work in a pandemic? The answer is absolutely. The principles are still sound. What's interesting is for a long time before the pandemic, I had already been doing interviews and assessments via video. And it was originally, scheduling issues. It was just tough to get everyone in the same location. And then, that client said, wow, I saved a lot of travel costs by having, at least you, Chris, be there via video. So I've been doing that. Probably 70% of the interviews had been via video at that point. So we had a lot of experience with it, and we could help our clients, adapt a little bit there. I'd say what has changed, is maybe the different characteristics that are important now that were important before, but not as important. And so, when you're in the office with your team, you're overseeing them, and you don't necessarily need to be an excellent delegator, and a very effective delegator. You need to be at least okay, but not necessarily excellent to get things done, because you're there. You can see them working. If they need some help, you can jump in and you can see that. But when you're managing a remote team, you need to be an excellent delegator and have systems and be well organized. So that's extremely important. One obvious one is flexibility and adaptability. Things are changing. We're pivoting. We might be going to the office. We may not go to the office. And, flexibility and adaptability and resilience have all become, much more important, or it's more important that people are excellent in those areas. Whereas before, okay or very good may have been just fine to deliver okay results.
And, as it relates to A players, I'm glad that you said that. For probably 3 to 4 years pre-pandemic, we were doing a lot of homework and study on remote working and benefits and pros and cons and those sorts of things. And one of the things that we found is that you may have found an A player, but only because they're coming to the office or coming to the job. And it doesn't mean that they're any less of a person working from home. It just may mean that the environment isn't quite right. My talent manager, Jessica Lara, she's absolutely incredible in really every way that I can think. And one of the things, she can work from home if she wants. Sometimes she does, but she prefers to come to that office. She is a very social person. She likes the interaction and the exchange and being there. And some people, believe it or not, enjoy that commute to get ready for the day, to listen to whatever they're listening to. And so that was something that we found, that just because someone may not be an A player working remotely or at the office, vice versa, we've also seen productivity improve and increase from having people at the office then go remote. And it solves a lot of really neat problems.
The remote issue, or the remote, is it really opens the candidate pool. because you're not just necessarily searching in your geography.
Yes.
Now. You can open that up. So, I mean, there's certainly some benefits to that. But whether it is, whether it's pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, there's something that's really important that I've been, doing a little bit of preaching on. And that is, a lot of the people who you would like to hire and bring onto your team, they're currently working. And, they're probably successfully employed and maybe even happy. You need to go out and look for them. Just posting jobs and hoping that the A player you would like to hire looks at your job ad there's so much luck involved in it. You need to be doing something proactively to get connected with those A players who are currently working right now.
Companies that subscribe to the top grading methodologies, what are some of the recruiting? Because there's definitely a difference between recruiting and hiring, but what are some of the common themes that you've seen in companies that have been successful in attracting A players, top talent? Because your A players are working, every single one of them, because A players work, they're productive, they're efficient. What do you see other organizations do to attract that talent?
Mm-hmm. And the very first quick answer is have an attractive referral program. And we're not saying that is the end all and be all, but by having that program and publicizing it and publicly rewarding, whether it's monetary, I always recommend giving people a little something for the effort, but also just recognizing them in front of their peers for referring somebody from their network is important. I really believe every organization should have one. Just asking when you have an open position, or if you have a certain position that you're filling really consistently, asking on a regular basis, who do you know? Have you talked to Sue lately? Because Sue's in your network. You told me about her a couple of months ago. Have you talked with her lately? We don't have an open position yet, but she seems great, and we want to keep her warm for when that position does open up. That everyone should be doing that, like kind of recruiting all day, every day, looking in your networks. And if you don't have those warm relationships, when you do have an open position, have your job scorecard and go out to your network and say, hey, who do you know? Who do you know who might fit this profile, or who do you know who might know someone who may fit that profile? And just working the relationship levels that way. It seems like it's effortful, and it is. It does take a little bit of time, but it's a lot higher probability play than posting that job and praying that the A player sees it when you're on the front page.
Just very, very unlikely. And I appreciate that is a process and takes just a little bit more effort. Grant Cardone, sales guru, he tells a story about being after his executive assistant or COO. I think she's been there now for probably a decade or so, or a decade plus, but how he was just after her, I think for 2 or 3 years. When are you going to come work for me? When are you going to come work for me? And so there's recruiting, and then there's Grant Cardone style recruiting where, he's there. And I really like what you said too, Chris, just about putting that job profile out there into your network to say, hey, not necessarily you that doesn't work here at Top Grading now, but who is it that that might fit the mold, right? I mean, you talk about, what a way to get it out there. You said something, Chris, in one of your interviews that I really, really liked as it related to perhaps budget and, is this a $10 an hour role? Is it a $60,000 an hour or salary type role or what? But you talked about champagne taste and a beer budget. And could you talk just a little bit more about that?
Yes. And it kind of relates back to the job scorecard somewhat. And it's really important that your compensation range matches your business needs, because if you set that compensation too low, you could hire an A player. I mean, really, it's someone who is in the top 10% of talent available for the pay. You could hire an A player for, let's say CFO, a $75,000 CFO You could find an A player who would disappoint if you need the skills and experience and capability of a $150,000 CFO. And so we need to be sure that the compensation is realistic. For more of your frontline roles, I'd also suggest, looking out there to see where else they can work for 10 or 15 or $20 per hour, whatever you think, you are going to pay, where else can they work? And, then think about, all right, so is this a more attractive job or a less attractive job, at least from the outside, in relation to where else they could work for this amount of money, and potentially adjust accordingly. Now, I've had clients who their frontline jobs were outside and largely in the southern US, where it's really hot in the summer and maybe not to northern standards, but really cold in the winter. And their compensation was set about the same as a frontline role at Target, and so we had to then think, all right, so should we be increasing the comp a bit, so people can then say, all right, yes, might be a little uncomfortable in the summer, little uncomfortable in the winter, but I'm getting a bit of something for the effort. So just having those kind of conversations and discussions, and maybe even doing an experiment or two, what can really pay off.
So I wanted to kind of go back a little bit. I believe that there's a case study out there that I've not found, but it ties in really, really well with what we're discussing and what we were talking about earlier with managerial oversight. I believe that there's got to be a correlation. Let's say hourly rate, hourly rate and managerial oversight are the two inputs. And so logically, to me, I would think that as the hourly rate increases, the managerial oversight decreases, or I would like to think so. And so if anyone's listening, and Chris, if you know of a study like that exists, please let me know. But did you have thoughts about that? Do you think that is true, or does that have any merit?
Austin, I won't say that I know that it's true or not. On the surface, it seems to make a lot of sense. Now, I will say though, it's really important that just adjusting your compensation, and finding people who would prefer to make $17 an hour versus $14 an hour, as long as you're hiring A players at that $17 per hour rate, seems to make a lot of sense to me. That's the case. I don't know of any research though offhand that validates or refutes it.
I'm going to keep searching then. One of my favorite questions, and I wonder what yours might be in the entire process, but is the idea and concept of torque, or threat of reference check. And it appears or seems to me that all of you at Topgrading have put a lot of really care and effort and consideration into the way that those questions are phrased, because as we've done the best we can to apply them, I am dumbfounded and astounded to hear what people share, mostly in a positive way, but it's just very conversational. It's very, very easy. And so the idea of the threat of reference check, it's really not a threat, but it's just wording the question. So, hey, Chris, when we call Bob at your previous place of employment, how do you think he would rate you on your performance for the job that you were hired to do on a 1 to 10? Could you maybe speak to either that question or maybe some of the psychology behind it?
And the psychology behind it is, one, they know we're going to talk to Bob, at some point if they make it deep enough into the hiring process. And so that's part of the psychology too. They're like, okay, they're going to verify and, see what Bob actually says. So I better do my best to guess what Bob is going to say, or I might look a little bit silly. Another part of it though is getting the candidate to look at themselves from another's perspective.
Yes.
And
yes.
So there's a bit of a separation. It's not that I'm admitting a weakness. It is what Bob would say were my developmental areas back then. And it's a little bit easier to answer that question. Now, Bob may have given some feedback that the candidate doesn't necessarily agree with. And so there too, it's like, well, Bob has given me this feedback over the years. So it's the reality versus saying, hey, Austin, what are your strengths and your weaknesses? Now, we do ask that question, but after spending 2 or 3 or 4 hours with a candidate, and they get relationship and rapport, and they're more apt to be open and transparent with the answer. But every candidate is ready for that question. Yeah. And if they're not, that should actually be a red flag, but they're ready for that question. And it's not a hypothetical when we say, what do you think Bob would say? Or what kind of feedback did Bob give you over those years? We ground it in reality. And so that's a few parts of the psychology there.
As we start to round this out, Chris, and thank you so much for being on. I mean, is there a part of the interview process or question that's your favorite, or where you really find out a lot about the candidate? Do you have a favorite part of that process?
Austin, I don't. It actually just depends on the candidate, because there's really no predicting what question or questions will reveal, some really interesting information about the candidate. So, it could be, at times it could be, please describe your manager. What was Bob like as a manager? And then you hear Bob and Sue and Pam all described in a very negative way. You can pretty much guarantee you will be the next manager who will be described in a negative way by that candidate. And I'm not saying that happens all the time, but that's the line of questioning. Or making mistakes, and it's never necessarily their fault. Well, this happened, but Bob was a terrible manager, so how could I not make that mistake? And that could be the line of questioning that reveals the really interesting patterns. I'll tell you that where I learn the most about candidates is when asking them about their accomplishments, and digging in and probing deeply, because I sort of have, I'll say maybe the privilege, but I get to interview mainly finalist candidates for leadership positions. So I spend just a ton of my time doing, and our clients are pretty good at the screening process. So I get to interview a lot of people who have been A players very consistently in their careers. And yes, I have an MBA that I got 20 years ago, but hearing the stories about how these very accomplished people have, done some often fantastic, and again, fantastic things, has been just a wonderful education. So I love the interview. I love the interview, love learning about the people I'm interviewing. And it just also happens that we can very effectively rate whether or not they're going to be a good fit for that role.
What a neat position to be in, to be able to have that opportunity to learn and hear what people have done and what they've Accomplished, and to see and feel them speak with pride about those accomplishments. That's neat. Well, Chris, thank you so much. Do you have any final words of either wisdom or counsel for those that may be listening that are perhaps applying top grading now, or are looking to be able to do that? How can they get started, or what would you tell them that might add even more value than you've already added today?
Yeah, Austin, if you're kind of new to top grading and this sounds interesting, I think pretty obvious recommendation is go to our website, poke around a little bit, but do download topgrading.com, absolutely topgrading.com, and download the e-guide. It's about 40 pages. It's a super easy read. It's the Cliff Notes version of the 4 key top grading steps, kind of the 4 key hiring problems and the solutions that top grading has to them. I think that's a great first step. Yeah, and we have workshops that you could attend, and of course, the information is on our website as well. But that e-guide is usually the starting point. And if you have some key positions or a key position that you cannot afford to get wrong, please give us a call, because frankly, that's our specialty, is helping, again, especially CEOs, get the right leaders on the team reporting to them. And we can really, really, really dramatically reduce the risk exposure to a hiring mistake there.
Fantastic. Topgrading.com. Go to the site. Obviously, Top Grading, the book, the proven hiring and promoting method that turbocharges company performance. Chris Mursau, everybody, thank you so much for being on. Tune in, everybody. Next week, we'll have more fantastic guests. Chris, thank you very, very much for your time. Create just a wonderful day.
All right. My pleasure, Austin. It was great being here.
Thank you for listening to the Multiply You podcast. You'll see us again soon when you subscribe for future episodes.